Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach those who work remotely and those who hire them how to work better together. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by TeamMadeApart.com. Team Made Apart features articles, tools, and resources designed to teach remote workers and those who hire them how to work better together. A community for owners, managers, leaders, freelancers, contractors, and all variety of remote worker, Team Made Apart is also a terrific resource for companies interested in implementing remote work policies in otherwise co-located environments, or for those planning to build fully distributed organizations from the jump. Listeners of this podcast have an exciting opportunity to get involved in the remote work revolution. In light of current events related to the coronavirus pandemic and a sudden worldwide shift to remote work, we're offering a free remote work best practices guide for leaders who find themselves struggling to create a remote work policy in a pinch. Now, and for the duration of the crisis, visit teammadeapart.com/crisis to not only download your free Team Made Apart Remote Policy Primer, how to write remote work policies that don't suck, but to find other tools and resources to help you weather the storm. Great working relationships make for great remote work experiences, and with this free guide, you'll be better equipped to do your part in creating and maintaining a happy and sustainable remote life. Once again, to take advantage of this collection of useful resources, please visit teammadeapart.com/crisis, that is teammadeapart.com/crisis, to download your free Best Practices Guide. Today's special guest is Fabrizia Zanca. Fabri is a Barcelona-based remote career consultant, passionate about helping people achieve their dream of becoming location independent. Coming from a background in recruiting, after a sudden layoff, she made an active choice to go remote and ultimately to start her own business, yourdreamremotejobnow.com. Since then, she has worked tirelessly to help other individuals in finding and landing great remote jobs through online courses, customized services, and one-on-one coaching. Here to talk about standing out from the crowd when looking for and applying to highly competitive remote jobs is our guest, Fabrizia Zanca. Hey Fabri, welcome to the show. I am so glad to have you here. I guess let's begin at the beginning. I know you have an interesting story about your initial jump into the remote world, so why don't we start there and you tell us a little about your background?
Yeah, so my background is in recruitment. I've been a recruiter for all my working life. I've worked in international and multinational companies until I reached the moment where, for both professional and personal reasons, I decided to go remote, and I decided to, do it as fast as I could. So what I did was challenging myself to find a remote job within 30 days, and I did it in 22, being a recruiter, not a tech recruiter, being Italian, as you can guys probably hear, and being based in Europe. So the reason why I always like to tell this is because, especially for people that are not US or Canada based, they always tell me, it's so difficult to find a remote job. It's so difficult if you're not native. It's so difficult if you're not a developer. And, it's not true. There's a remote job for everybody. There are opportunities for everybody. So basically this is my story. Then I finally got this remote job as a recruiter based in Europe for Kraken, which is a leading company in the blockchain and cryptocurrency environment. And after 6 months, some reasons brought me to start my own company. So at that point, I was laid off. For reasons that I can't talk about. But then I decided, okay, what do I do with my life? Shall I try to find a remote job, or shall I start to create my own business? And so I just wanted to test a little bit the situation. And I saw that after that experience, even if it was just for 6 months, I could land so many opportunities. I was invited to a lot of remote for a lot of remote jobs from remote companies. And so I said, okay, let's give it a try. Let's start my own business. And what I do now is helping people finding a remote job. I'm not a headhunter because sometimes people think I am. I'm just a coach or a consultant that is providing all the important information that people need to land a remote job. So where to search, how to apply, and all those kind of beautiful things.
Well, it's great. And it's funny because I think for a lot of people, when they think they're going to just get into a remote job, for whatever the reason, personal or professional or whatever it may be, I think people don't realize how different the job hunt is from sort of a traditional job hunt where you would go and hand over your paper resume to some shop in town. And, I think they don't realize some of the complexities or some of the differences in that. And so I think that you'll be a great person to sort of have this conversation with and maybe offer some great advice to the listeners of this show, how they can maybe better prepare themselves for that type of process. I think, the reasons people go into remote, and it's been very interesting as I've met a number of different people, the reasons vary quite a bit, from personal things like maybe I've had a child and I want to stay home now and I want to be able to work from home, or, I'm sick, or I have social anxiety, or I have, any number of problems. There's so many reasons to go remote. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum where it's, well, I would like to work from a beach, or I'd like to see the world, or these other things. And so there's such a broad spectrum when you talk remote work. It's a really interesting field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely it is. I mean, there are so many people that have so many reasons why they want to go remote. And it can also just be the mentality. I've really noticed that companies that adapt the remote work policy or way of working have a very different mentality. Like, first of all, they treat you as an adult and not as a child that you need to be micromanaged. So maybe it's also just because of that. And yeah, I've talked with, of course, a lot of clients of mine, and some just want to, buy a van, rebuild it, and travel the world. Some, like me, they just need to, have the flexibility in their schedule to pick up their children. So the reasons are many. The point is, of course, a remote company understands it, but when you apply, you need also to show that there's more to that. I mean, of course, everybody wants to go remote because you can work from everywhere. But maybe when you apply, you should also say, and they've noticed that compared from working from an office, I'm much more productive. And those little things are the little things that are crucial, but people don't think about and really makes the difference.
Yeah, I think you hit a couple things that are really important or really, worthy of bringing back up is, first of all, this idea of employer mindset. If they're willing to bring on remote workers, that says something about their way of doing business. And I think that that's a really, astute observation, because for people, remote work isn't for everybody. Not everybody is looking to do this kind of thing. And, a lot of people are very comfortable working in their offices, maybe for older companies who haven't been as progressive or who haven't advanced into doing remote work as a policy yet. And that's okay. There's a spot for those people. But if you do have the mentality, or you do have the skill set, or you do have the drive to make yourself, interested in doing remote work in the first place, finding employers who are already supportive of that, I think in terms of culture fit, will make a really nice, it would be much easier to blend into that environment if they're already fully on board with your interests. So yeah. I think that's a great point. The other thing you said was talking about sort of the, flexibility of being able to be treated like an adult, and I think that so many people are used to these micromanager situations where you've got somebody hovering over your shoulder all the time. And even people who work for corporations who maybe allow them to go home and work for a minute, or maybe they're sick or have to stay with a child for a couple of days, so they work remotely. The cultural difference between the way you're treated when you're just working, for a couple of days at home, and we know you'll be back, so we'll kind of give you a little bit of rope, versus the full-time remote worker, I think is so different that I think it really was important to repeat that, or sort of focus on that detail.
Yeah, definitely. It's also funny. I mean, we're living in a time now with the coronavirus. Everybody's talking about it. It's now in Italy as well. I'm Italian, so I'm really following what's happening in Europe, Italy as well. But, I saw many articles saying, okay, so you guys, you want to work from home, go ahead and do it, because now it's definitely the time to do it, because obviously people can't go to their offices. And it's just funny to see how big corporate they don't allow it, it's not possible, then all of a sudden it is possible. And people really have to be very careful with those kind of organizations, in my opinion, because it's what you said. The values sometimes are not really aligned between employees and companies. So when a company, big multinational, for example, decides to allow work from home, I think people really have to take it very carefully, because let's see, what their management style behind it. But I just wanted to bring that up as well, because anyways, it's a trend, and more companies will have to adapt because people want it, and therefore, if we want to be competitive and have the best candidates ever, we see that more companies are.
Well, and I think what you said about the coronavirus is interesting, right? I mean, I think it's proving. I mean, if you have to find a positive or a silver lining in this thing, as it pertains to remote work, I think it sort of made evidence. It put these companies who might not otherwise think of remote, in a situation where it made sense to allow it. And maybe that's, going to prove, hopefully it will prove for the positive that people are capable of doing this kind of work. And maybe that will change the mentality of some of these companies that, previously didn't think about it. If the evidence doesn't end up being that good, say, that a lot of these people don't do that well when they're at home or whatever, then maybe it won't be as good evidence for remote work. But I do think that, that employers should take this time or this opportunity to kind of, understand this, take some time and really leverage the information they're gathering right now as these people are working remotely. What does that feel like? How's that go? Because, in the short term, they don't have policies for this stuff yet. They're not really set up to be a remote employer at this moment. And so, but what a great opportunity to quickly develop policies and things that work and allow your company to evolve. So I think, despite the horrific nature of the disease and everything else, I think the positive could be really good in terms of, carbon footprint and emissions and, just all the horrible things that happen when you have to have, millions of people go into an office. If these millions could stay home, how good would that be for everything?
Yeah, for sure. And in general, it really comes down to, the intelligence of the founders of those companies, the, higher level, because you have interviewed a lot of amazing guests. Some, are really experts in supporting companies going remote. And I think this is very important. If a company finally decides to go remote, it's so much better to rely on the expertise of people like the ones you have interviewed and not just go and do it by themselves, because the management, impact of it's so strong. And if you do it without the support of an expert, can be so destructive. So if somebody is listening and wants to go remote as a company, please get the support and advices of.
Well, it's so true because, remote work is one of those things that we kind of, I think, take for granted a little bit. Like if you're an employer and you haven't really put a lot of thought into remote work, you might think about it as, oh, well, we have laptops, we have Slack, we have, so we're set up, you can be remote, no problem. Like we think of it from the technological side, but we don't think about it from the people side very often. And I think that's where employers, can step on landmines or get themselves in trouble, is by not sort of thinking people first or being intentional about creating this policy. They just sort of, ease into it because technology will allow it, but they don't think about the repercussions that will hit them, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the road.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I think you're right. An expert is key. So, well, let's talk a little bit about then, if I'm a worker and I'm either considering a change into remote work, or I am presently a remote worker looking for other jobs, but let's assume maybe no experience in this sphere, just that's your experience. So maybe you can sort of teach from that perspective. What should I look out for? I mean, first things first, if I'm looking for remote work, I mean, first of all, where do I find a job?
Mm-hmm. Well, I always say that they are everywhere. Once you know where to look, you will see so many opportunities coming. There are remote job boards. I recently published an article of more than 60 options based on industry, role, location. So important use the tool that makes sense for you. If you are not based in the US, then FlexJob, for example, which is a great tool for people in that part of the world, is not a great tool for us in Europe or in Asia. So yeah, Facebook group, Slack is another amazing tool because it allows you to network with the right people in the field and companies you want to be. Social media in general, like Instagram or Twitter as well. So those are the places in general. There are a lot of remote companies that people can keep an eye on. Online events, podcasts as well. There are so many podcasts about remote work with so many people working remotely, and this is already a great inspiration to expand your job search. And yeah, also something I always advise is, when you are typing, I hope you are not hearing my daughter screaming in the background. Sorry about that.
Oh, but no worries. This is the joy of working remote, right?
Exactly. With a sick daughter at home and having nowhere else to go. But yeah, so for example, if I'm looking for a position as a recruiter and I start searching and then I find a cool company, but this company doesn't have a job for me, an important thing to do is expanding your job search. So what is this company doing? Who are the competitors? What are the alternatives of that specific software that they sell? And so often I come across other remote companies. And then finally, after a few searches, I found a recruiter job, for example. So it's important as usual to be creative and never stop on what you just find. And then again, networking is super important. I can't stress it enough.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, and there's, I think, a lot of parallels. I think when people think about remote work, they immediately think of, again, we talked about this, the technology, and that you can go and just be from wherever, and you can sit on top of an island and do your thing or whatever it is, and I think people kind of forget how much human interaction is still involved in being a great remote worker. And one of those things, like to your point about trying to find work, is networking. I mean, what role does human interaction and human or in-person or online networking make in finding work? I mean, I know in my situation, in the past, if I've looked for employment as a remote worker, I mean, you're often competing against hundreds or thousands of other applicants. I mean, like, there's got to be some way to thin the herd a little bit, or make yourself visible. And it seems to me, or at least in my experience, that networking is one of those better ways. But it's kind of counterintuitive because it's offline and it's not being remote. Like, you have to stop and go see people and talk to people. And so I wonder if what your perspective is on the sort of the importance of networking as it pertains to finding a new job.
Yeah, I mean, I always say it's the most important way, because even when you finally found the job that is great for you, please go ahead, talk with the recruiter, talk to the HR manager, the hiring manager who is involved in this recruitment process. Find them on LinkedIn, find them wherever, but tell them that you have applied. So this is something, anyways, I tell all the time. And for the rest, both online and offline events are extremely important, especially for those who, may have it a little bit more complex to land a remote job. So for example, if, I don't know, for any reason, I'm super interested in working in the food industry, and, there are remote jobs in that field, but not so many. What I would do is try to find those people through blogs, through Medium, through LinkedIn, connect with them, see where they've worked before, see, if they know anybody that is looking for somebody as a recruiter in this case, or any other job in that specific field. Ask them how they got there. And, often people are so happy to talk about themselves and to help others. I have a positive view on human beings, I guess. But this is the way to go. And of course, it takes time. I mean, people will not get a remote job in 22 days like I did, probably. I was very lucky, I guess. I don't know. But most likely, it is a process. It takes time. It will give you frustration. You have to deal with that. And at the end of the process, you will be able to land the job you want. So
yeah. And I think that's a point too that maybe we should bring up, is sort of just the amount of time. I know that, in your case, as you mentioned, you were lucky that you landed a position in 22 days. And I think for some people, there's this idea that because there's so many remote jobs, even though there's not really relative to the number of people, but it feels like a lot, especially if you start looking for them, you'll see hundreds and thousands of jobs. But I guess you don't factor in the number of humans looking for them. And but as you're starting to do this search, like, how do you, figure out who the best employer is for you? Like, I mean, so I understand there are a lot of them, but like, and maybe you mentioned sort of the idea of pinning things down by interest, like you have an interest in doing this kind of work for that kind of company in this sort of industry, so maybe that's one way. But do you have any other thoughts about like pinning down a remote employer? And I think part of this question is like things to watch out for. So like, are there red flags, things we should be aware of when, looking at a job listing, for example, to try and determine whether it's going to be a good fit or not?
Yeah. Well, what I suggest to my clients is always to go have a look at Glassdoor, because that is already showing you some red flags from employees that are working or have worked there. Again, connect. Maybe you can find somebody that had worked there and they can tell you why they decided to leave. And maybe that story is beautiful and, they just wanted to have another job with another company. But maybe they can tell you something more about the management style based on what you have read on Glassdoor. So it does take time. Any part of the process of looking for a remote job takes time, but it's time well invested. And I always say, as a recruiter, I always said that to my candidate, and now I'm saying this to my client. Being hired from a company is like getting married, and if you don't share the same values, the marriage is not going to last. So you want to make sure that the values that they show and the mission that they show in their website is aligned with your values. So you are sure that you're never sure, but you hopefully will be aligned in that sense. So those are the ways I recommend people to follow to make sure that they find the right.
That's great advice. Yeah, no, that's really great advice. Now, on the other side of that coin, so one thing, and we mentioned this earlier, is that not everybody's really cut out for remote work. Some of us think we might want to do it, but we don't. Are there certain skills that you think people ought to have or make them a more effective remote worker? If one was going to do a little bit of a self-assessment and decide if remote work was for them, do you have any sort of criteria that you look at when you're working with a candidate?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, communication for sure. You need to be a great communicator, being able, to communicate well in a written way, and also understand the point of view of the other person, because there can be so many miscommunication in between when you are talking, writing to somebody else, and you really need to have this helicopter view of having your point of view, but also understanding the point of view of the other person. You need to be able to work independently. And by that, I mean, find your own solution to your own problems, because, maybe you're coming across some issues that you can't fix with the help of your colleague, because maybe those people are sleeping. So you really need to be creative and find a way to best solve your own problems. I think that those are really important things. If you are somebody that loves to be surrounded by people, then maybe go remote is not the best option for you, or maybe it is, but then you have to find other solutions. So maybe you need to join a co-working space for a few days in a week. It really depends on everybody. And of course, the best way to understanding it is trying. So maybe you can be involved with projects that have nothing to do with finding a remote job or working remotely, but they can be just online collaborations, and try it, test it, see if there's any, event you can work on or project you can work on, and see how you feel with that. That's the best way.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of people might assess themselves as being a self-starter or a great communicator and things like that. So I think your idea of sort of doing a trial or, experimenting, or even if it's a project at your own job or something that you could try from home, or, something like that. So you could kind of sort of, try it before you fully invest, or, you quit your job to go find something new, because, like we were saying about sort of the length of time it takes to find work. I mean, I've heard cases that are sometimes as long as 6 months or more. And so if that's the case, then, to just quit your job and assume you can go remote, that might be a little scary. So, but this idea of trying it out and sort of testing your skills, seeing how good of communicator am I when I'm at a distance, and how great am I at being a self-starter when I don't have a boss or somebody there to yell at me. So I think that's a really great idea.
Or even, and this is what I'm doing with my clients as well, having so many tech tools like Slack, Asana, Trello, so many stuff that you can use on a daily basis. Sometimes it's really overwhelming for people. And I notice it from my clients. And that's exactly the reason why I'm using all these tools as well, because I want to test them and train them. And, maybe some found out that maybe the remote is not the best solution for them. So yeah, the best way is testing as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, so to that point though, so are some of these skills that we're talking about, what we're talking about are sort of soft skills or power skills. Like, is there a way to develop some of those things? So say, you've got a sick child at home, or maybe something longer term, maybe you're caring for a parent or something, and you decide you want to go remote so that you can stay home with your parent. And, it's remote isn't what you would want to do, but it's, it's a situation that you're maybe being thrown into where it makes the most sense. Do you have any advice for developing these skills? So becoming a self-starter or becoming a better communicator?
Yeah. So, well, the first thing is, when you have the need of finding a remote job, start searching, see what are the most required soft skills that you see posted in the job descriptions, and start working on them. You can also assess yourself to have a better overview of what your skills are. There are free tools like the 16 personality test. I think it really gives a good overview that you can work on. And as for the skills, this is a very interesting question, actually, because hard skills are much easier to develop. Because if you want to become a developer, then you study, you start to apply them, and there you go. But when we talk about communication, then, for example, just to take an example, it really starts to be much more complex. But again, it comes down to training those kind of skills and understanding what are your weaknesses. So if I feel that I am bad in communicating with others in a written way, then what I have to do is trying to find a way and join, Facebook groups or Slack groups, and start collaborating with other people, and see how my communication is impacting them. Do they understand what I mean? Am I creating any miscommunication? If so, what I can do to improve my communication style. So it comes down to testing, getting feedback from others. Also, for example, another important thing is communicating via video. And something people can do is hop on a call with a friend that is on the other side of the world, and prepare a speech, whatever it is. I do it with the interviews, for example. I prepare my clients for interviews. I record them, and I'm like, okay, you see, those are the things that didn't come across so pretty or so well. And maybe this is something you can work on and you can keep training. So that is it. But soft skills are really, really hard to train. So you need to be creative.
Well, I think one of the things, and I beat on this idea a lot, but it's this idea of intention. So, those soft skills, they're hard to learn, but if you're intentional about it, if it's important to you to find a job, like, I feel like you can kind of overcome, right? You put in a little extra effort, you try a little harder, you take a little more time to write out your conversation, whatever it is. But if you're intentional about it and you sort of approach the work that way, it seems that these soft skills are a little, I wouldn't say easier to overcome, but you can almost act as if. Like if you're not traditionally a great communicator online or via instant message or text or something, but you have to be in this situation, or in the case of, I must find a job where I can take care of my mother at home, then, you're in a situation where you've got to do it. So you sort of will rise to the occasion, at least with most people I've found. It's easy to not do it if you don't have to, but if all of a sudden you're in a situation where you have to. So I think it's really important to set that intention and make sure that, you're ready to put in the work, because I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, first of all, it's also good to understand theory behind it, because sometimes, I always have this moment where I'm like, this is exactly what I thought, and now I see it written down, and it's like, I understand this concept much better, and then it's easier to work on that specific soft skill. And second of all, motivation is for sure the biggest part or the biggest influence that will help you getting a remote job. And I was in a conference here in Barcelona. I was talking with other speakers, and we were talking about what brought us to become entrepreneurs. And I talked with this family, and they were commuting like 5 hours per day. They had a child, and they were burned out, and they reached the bottom of the worst situation they could ever reach. And that motivation really gave them the strength to go ahead, teach themselves whatever they needed to become entrepreneurs, and now they are successful entrepreneurs. So you need to suffer deeply to find your own strength. And in this case.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think it's true in a lot of senses, right? I mean, a parallel would be somebody who suffers with drug addiction or whatever. Here, the idiom we use here in the States is that, they've hit rock bottom. So once they've hit rock bottom, well, you can't go any lower. So now all you can do is go up. And that's when people sort of tend to, pull themselves up and start doing the work and get themselves, and it's better if you can avoid hitting the bottom first, but if you cannot, if you're in a situation that's really desperate, it will force you to become a better version of yourself. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing and something, to be celebrated.
Absolutely.
So as we sort of continue down this path, I'm still, I'm now have never applied for remote work before, but I'm feeling pretty good about my, self-assessed ability to communicate. I did a project with my former employer by remote, and it went pretty good. So I feel like I'm in a good spot. Now I've identified a couple companies, I've avoided the red flags I've seen on Glassdoor. And how do we now proceed? So I mentioned sort of earlier in the show that, when you submit an application, you're going against maybe hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of applicants, because unlike the situation that, where you're working for the local, corner store or something, you are basically competing with a field of applicants that could more or less be worldwide. So a lot of employers are using tools that, like AI and things like that to sort of scrub applications and get rid of people who don't seem to fit for one reason or another. But do you have any advice for sort of rising to the top, like making yourself stand out in this field of what could be thousands?
Yeah. All right. So because it takes so much time to find the right opportunity, it so much makes sense to customize your application. And that's also why I always say, since you're putting the effort, make sure that you apply to 2-3 jobs that you really, really want. And customize your application, meaning customize your resume, your cover letter, and even create a video presentation, even when it's not required. And those are the best way to pass the screen of a recruiter or an ATS. So starting from I always say that the resume shows your skills, the cover letter, your motivation, and the video presentation, your personality and communication style, which is so important for a remote company. And talking about the resume and the cover letter as well, what you want to do is reading carefully the job description, find the keyword, and put them in your resume too. And this will help you triggering the ATS, the application tracking system. You need to highlight your soft skills, your leadership skills, any remote experience you have had. I didn't have any remote experience when I landed my first remote job, but I put it like this big in my resume that I had experience working in distributed teams, meaning that actually in my situation was that I was sitting in Barcelona all alone as a recruiter, and all the other recruiters were spread around Europe. And yes, it's not, work from home job, but I never had my recruiter sitting close to me. There are some companies that allow you to work from home 1 day per week, for example, or 1 day per month. You want to put it there, and you want to say how much working from home has helped your productivity compared to when you don't work from home. Those are all the tricks that you need to do and that you need to follow. In the cover letter, for example, it's super important to show that you have done your homework, you have researched the hell out of the company, the hell out of the job description, and you focus on, and this is true also for the resume, you focus on the company and not on yourself. Why are you good for that company? Which achievements have you had in your previous experiences that are going to show that you can do a beautiful job for that company based on what you have read in the job description? Those are super, super important things to start adding in a resume and in a cover letter.
Yeah, well, and I think that, that's a great observation, this idea of looking at the needs of the business. I bring this up a lot of times with candidates who are maybe working in-house presently and asking their present employer about moving to a remote position or beginning to work from home a little bit or something like that. One of the big things, one of the big things that we advocate for with them is, be sure that you're positioning your interest in working out of home or out of office in the frame or through the lens of what's good for business. How does this move business along? And I think it's great, as an observation here in the position where you're just trying to find work, that you would already be taking that step, that you're already looking at the needs of that business and how you can best benefit them. I think that idea of not being sort of selfish with your skills, but looking at how the things that you do could actually positively impact their business has to be much more attractive than, I'm great, but I need a job, so just give me a job.
Yeah, exactly. This is not going to work. It's never going to work because it's really always about the company. That the company, in a way, doesn't care about you and what you're looking for. Yes, of course, you will say that you're looking for a company where you hope to develop and grow within the company and help them achieving their goals. This is what everybody's saying. But you need to put it in a different way that makes sense for the company and for the need. And when I say show the company that you have done your homework, is really that. I mean, like, I have a template and that my clients are using. And I say, for example, go listen to the podcast of the CEO of that company and report, the core of that topic that this person was talking about and how you align with their vision or whatever they were saying and write it in the cover letter. This is a beautiful way to show that you align to what they have said. Hopefully, hopefully you do align and that's why you're applying. And also that you have done your job. I mean, because otherwise, it's just apply, click and apply and see what happens, and it's not going to work. So
well, I think
is important.
Yeah, I think too, it's also a great way to sort of demonstrate that you are a self-starter and that you are a, motivated individual and that, you're really looking for team versus this idea of, being a solo guy and being brought up by the company, rather allow me to lift the company. It's just a little bit of a shift in perspective, but I think it becomes sort of indicative of the skills we talked about that are necessary or important in remote work. Because, here you are, I'm not reliant on you, Mr. Company. Allow me to help you. This is what I could do for you. And I think that idea of giving of yourself and being intentional with that, is a real, a good opportunity to demonstrate some of those skills, even if it doesn't really feel like you're putting them on display.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And also something I always get as a question from my clients is, should I put that I have my own little business or that I am super passionate about whatever it is? And I'm like, yes, put it, because one of the downside of working remotely is isolation and burnout and people, working many, many hours. And so if an employer sees that you have your passions and you have your life outside the job is a great way for them to know that you will be able to log off at a certain point. So this is also something else that I really do believe it's important for, the right employer, to show.
Yeah. Well, and I think that segues into a great topic, or this idea about sort of, I guess, self-preservation and protection. Like as a remote worker, maybe you found the position, but how do you as a remote worker kind of, I guess, balance, everybody's looking for this work-life balance, right? And assuming you're a good hard worker and you're intentions are set correctly and you're working really hard to do a good job for your company, part of being remote, or one of the pitfalls that a lot of remote workers fall into, is this abundance of availability. This idea that they are always online, or they are always accessible via text or Slack or email or whatever. And so to your point about being able to shut off at some point, what are things that remote workers can do to kind of take care of themselves and make sure that they're doing a good job, not just for their employer, but also taking care of themselves and treating this like work? This is still a job. It's not somebody doing you a favor. It's still work.
Yeah, this is a very hard question for me, because actually I'm still dealing with that, trying to find the best way. To me, it works that at 5 p.m. I have to pick up my daughter, and I'm always late, but that is the, switching off moment for me. I think routines are probably the most important thing. There are also, I know that there are apps that will turn off your notifications. Maybe it's even good to have two phones, like one with a SIM where you have all your apps for your job and if you're an entrepreneur, for your own work, and then another one that is just for friends, and there's no Gmail even. But yeah, those kind of tricks probably. I do think that setting up your own routine is probably the best way to prevent yourself from burnout. So stick to it, create your schedule, stick to it, go to the gym. If you don't have children that you have to pick up to, otherwise they will remain there alone, then say that at 6 you go to the gym, you do whatever you love to do, just do it. And switch off. There are companies. Yeah, there are
go
companies.
ahead.
Yeah, sorry. There are companies, and I love that when they do it, that are really clear in their team management style. You can even see in their about page how they treat communication. And, yes, you need to be available, but we do understand that it's 10 p.m. and even if we text you, we are not expecting you to answer back. So there are cool companies that really put it out there, and those are the companies where I want to work for as a remote employee.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation. And it is sort of the difference, right? I mean, I think a lot of people assume because they've received a text that I must answer it. We're sort of trained that way. We get our stupid little red badge on our phone and it's annoying and we have to clear that text or whatever. And so we're sort of trained to behave that way, instant access. So they accessed us and now we must respond. But I think that being disciplined and not doing that is important. And I think you mentioned sort of the key word, which is this idea of ritual. This, thing that you do each day, just like you would if you were going into a traditional office, to have some sort of protocol or some sort of process that you go through, at least in my experience, has been wildly beneficial. I mean, like in my case, I get up at 6:30 every morning, I shower, I get ready, I get dressed as if I'm going to an office, and then I walk into my home office, but getting up and sort of setting my direction, I guess, sort of setting my path versus the alternative of laying in bed until 10 o'clock and getting up and putting on pajamas and kind of loafing all day. For me to get up and get set and get ready is just like as if I was going to work. And it just puts me in the right headspace, gets me sort of ready to go to work. And so I think it is really important to have these kinds of rituals. And like you say, I mean, I also have children. And so in my case, I can't really start my work day until I get the kids dropped off. So I have to get the oldest one in the carpool and the youngest one off to school. And then once that's done, I can come home and start work. And then I'll take a little bit of time to practice my Spanish. I'll take a little time to do a little reading. I'll take a little time to do this and that. And that's kind of my me time. And then I roll into work and I start doing client projects from there forward. And so, but by having that routine, then I also know it's okay to check out at, 5:30, 6 o'clock. And now it's family time again. The kids are home. I've got to go prepare dinner. I like to cook. So I go and I spend a little extra time cooking and spending time in the kitchen. And, but by having that routine, you maintain your sanity because I still take text or email in the middle of the night. I still respond to stuff when I probably shouldn't. I mean, I still do that. But by having, maybe 80% of a great routine, it's, it really keeps me from hitting the sort of the burnout and some of these other things that people are commonly running into in remote work.
Yeah. And I do think that two things. Having your home office set up in a different room than, your living room, for example, which is something I did before, is already important because you go into a room and you know that room is for work and you get out of it and you leave work behind when you're done. So this is one thing. And the other thing is that really is a process like many other things in life. When people start to work remotely, they will probably come across all the same issues that we always talk about in the remote work community, I guess, and you start learning and getting better and improve on it. So it takes time. It's always good, to self-reflect on what you have improved on, since 2 months ago or 3 months ago. So set some small goals and work on it, because people will improve their remote work style too.
Well, yeah, no, it's true. And I mean, one of the big selling points, or one of the big things that is talked about commonly in remote work circles is, how much more productive remote workers can be and all this stuff. But those are aspirational things, right? I mean, if you don't set yourself up to be successful or to be productive, then it's not going to just happen magically because you're working from home. And so it is really important to have these great structures set up. And that idea of self-assessment is awesome. I mean, how do you know how you're doing if you never look? You kind of have to follow that along a little bit and see how you've improved in different ways. And so I think it is good to be sort of self-aware and understand, that it's okay. We're growing, we're improving, we're getting better. But if you're going to achieve these results, the type of productivity results that you probably pitched to an employer or, whatever, to try and get your opportunity to work from home, then it's really important that you set yourself up to win, because it's very easy, for some people to set themselves up to not win.
Absolutely. And also keep track of your time. This is something I've started to use, and it's like mind blowing. I use Toggle to keep track of my activities, and I'm like, how the hell did I spend 1 hour on a Facebook post? There's something very wrong I'm doing there, and let's see why I am losing so much time on such an easy task. So it's for sure very important to also keep track of your time and see.
Well, in the spirit of, because you're Italian and speaking, in the spirit of Italian, I use the pomodoro method. So that was sort of born in Italy. And it's this idea of these little 15-minute or 25-minute spurts where you just do work and then you stop and take a little break and then you work and take a break. And I found for me that that's really effective, to have this great focused time where I just spend 25 minutes. So in the morning, my little personal time, I do a pomodoro, so 25 minutes of Spanish practice. And that's just a little, something to try and keep my level up. And, I'm not improving much, but it's at least keeping me sort of where I was. And, and then I'll take 2 pomodoros of reading time. So I'll stop and read. And that's sort of my self-growth, self-improvement time. And so, but by then, I've managed it. I mean, if I wasn't paying attention, if I was just sitting down and doing stuff, well, I might fiddle around for an hour on Duolingo or whatever, or, go outside for a minute and then come back. And, and then if I was reading, well, maybe it's a great book and I get lost in it and I lose 2 or 3 hours, or maybe I read 15 minutes and I don't get anything out of it. Yeah. And so by having these pomodoros as a way to sort of, meter my day has helped quite a bit. I also work in advertising and marketing, so a lot of our output is measured by the hour, even though we're trying to change that now. So much of our work is still sort of monitored hourly, or it's bid in an hourly kind of way. And so, we have to keep track of time. It's really important. But, in the spirit of self-assessment, this idea of going back and revisiting that time, why did it take me an hour to write that post when really I shouldn't dedicate more than 10 or 15 minutes to that, and understanding why it took so long and how you could maybe become more efficient, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess now, so our work hygiene is sort of set up and things are going pretty good. We're communicating with our employer, I guess, because they haven't fired us yet. Everything's sort of going well. Like, what do we do from here? Let's say we're ready for, the next step in our career. We want to maybe try and advance a little bit. And one thing that's really difficult for remote workers to do is to go up through the chain. Sometimes just not being present, you're not top of mind sometimes. And so, there might be opportunities that pass you by or that come up at the water cooler that you're not, privy to or whatever. And so I know that advancement can be a difficult thing. Is there any set of skills that you coach people up on that, might help lead to advancement?
Mm-hmm. Well, my focus is really helping people get a remote job. So this is really my expertise. But in terms of career advancement, I would say, especially for those who want to switch career a little bit, is talk to your manager, because if you don't express your needs and your will, nobody will will get it to you. Give it to you. Sorry. And again, practice. So I have clients that want to switch career, and maybe they are taking, I don't know, designing courses because they want to become designers. Then what you want to do, if you are lucky enough to work remotely, is talk with the design department. See how you can be involved in some easy projects. Start to develop those skills if you really want to change the direction of your career, which is something that I see more and more often coming. And, if you just want to progress vertically, so if you want to become a manager or a director, well, that, in my opinion, really follows the classical normal path that, people would find also in a normal company, as long as you have achieved all the soft skills you need to have to be a great manager, for example. So you need to learn not only to communicate, but to be a very good listener. How to manage a distributed team that is, working in different time zones. How can you do it? Maybe you can, again, try to get involved in other projects and be the project leader of something in your department. So those are all good ways to develop your career vertically. But again, my biggest focus is how to get to the remote position.
Sure. So cool. Well, so let's use that then as a segue to sort of start to wrap things up and talk a little bit about what you do. So, in your business, you spend a lot of time coaching and all that sort of thing, but let's talk a little bit about your service offering, what you do, and how you could help somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's start from the fact that I try to help everybody that is in need of a remote job anywhere in the world, because I saw that in the US market, there are many people that are doing this. I think my strength is being a recruiter and being based in Europe. And I didn't find many other people supporting clients from this standpoint. So I have developed different ways I can help people with different budgets, because, of course, helping somebody in India or in the US, we are talking about very different budgets. So I try to develop services that can accommodate the budget of everybody. But the way I work is through customized approach. So kind of one-on-one services based on your specific needs, based on your specific struggles. Or for those that feel already more confident and they just need to learn a little bit more about remote work or where to search or how to apply, then I have online courses. I also send out emails every week with remote jobs because, as I said, they come to me in any field. I get them all the time. So I collect them all in a newsletter and I send out remote jobs. So yeah, I have online courses, memberships, a Slack membership as well. I remake resumes, I prepare people for the interviews. There are a lot of things I can do. And the point is that what I love to do the most is adapting to the needs of somebody. So I always prefer to talk prior to working with somebody to really understand if I can help or not. And also, I must be honest, today I was just talking with a client, and this person is working in the healthcare industry in the US, and I don't feel like I am the right person for this person because I have never worked in the healthcare industry. I don't know much about that, so I just redirected him to actually a competitor of mine. But, I really want to make sure that I am able to help. And for those who are, fresh graduates, I always recommend to work a couple of years in a normal office environment, because most likely those people that are fresh from the university and are just starting their job and need a buddy, need a mentor, need somebody that is sitting there with them. So maybe in that case, it's good to start with in an international company, that's for sure, and being already in touch with people from all around the world and colleagues from all around the world. But definitely, if you're just starting, I do believe that it's much better to work from an office.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. There are so many people that, try and jump right into remote work, but I think you don't even understand the dynamics in the office if you've never been in one. And I think, especially if you're on like sort of a hybrid team or something like this, where you've got some resources that are co-located somewhere and then you're off remote. I think it's really important to understand that inter-office dynamic so that you can understand what it's like, inside the office, because you can't empathize wholly or completely if you don't really understand how that works. So I think it's really important that people do that too. That's great advice.
Yeah, for sure. We always have to suffer a little bit when we start our careers, I believe. I mean, I suffered a lot as an Italian in Italy, and that's why I moved to Spain, where actually, it's not much better, but well, whatever. But yeah, at the beginning it's really difficult for everybody. And I actually love to talk with students because they have these beautiful ideas and I like to put them back to her sometimes, but also at the same time guide them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. So Fabri, just to close, where can people find out more about you and track you down online?
Yeah, so I'm online. I have my website, which is called Your Dream Remote Job Now. Very complex name. I will tell you another story about that as well. And then I have a Facebook group with the same name. I am on Instagram as well. I'm on LinkedIn as Fabrizia Zanca, so people can just reach out to me through all these channels.
That's great. And we'll make sure to put links in the show notes and everything too. Well, Fabri, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad you were able to fit us in. This, I think, is really important information for people looking for work. And I'm glad to have shared it with you. And also just to have had you back on. As I said, you were one of the very first people I spoke to as I was beginning my journey in sort of the remote work advocacy world. And I'm really grateful for your willingness to share your information with me and share your knowledge with me. And I'm glad to have you back to do this together.
Of course. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon here in Barcelona.
Yeah, I hope so. Me too. I'm super jealous.
Oh, no, don't be.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Fabri. Take care.
Thank you.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know you.